Hello everyone, I hope you guys had an amazing day today. Alright, let's move on to our last session of the day, titled Crypto Cyber Risk for National Security, Finance and Web3. So our guest panelists are Beju Shah, Bank of International Settlements, Dr. Sungyong Kang, Interpol Financial Crime and Anti-Corruption Center, Dr. Arda Akartuna, Elliptic, Carole, former White House advisor, Penumbra Strategies, and our moderator is Softic from Intertangible. Please come up to the stage. Round of applause.
Thank you for such a wonderful welcome to the stage. It's exciting to be here. Actually, last year was the first time on this very stage at this very event that on WebEx we started talking about an important topic about the crypto-enabled crime and fraud. And earlier today, Sungyong actually spoke at a different session, very much about how law enforcement works with the industry. So it will definitely be an exciting panel to talk with people who have, experts who have worked with the governments, blockchain analytics companies, law enforcement agencies, and also central banks. And this session will focus specifically on the use of technology in exacerbating, but also in helping prevent financial and crypto crimes. And unfortunately, Beju could not join us today, but he has an important message for us. So I will ask the WebEx production team to play a little video.
Hello, and konnichiwa Tokyo, and WebEx. Firstly, let me apologize for the fact that I can't be there with you all and on this esteemed panel today. I'm really sad that I can't be there because actually, you know, from last year, WebEx was a truly fantastic event, and I think, you know, even the similar panel we had last year, we delivered some important messages, and actually it's amazing to see how, you know, how the industry grows and all the kind of innovations that are coming out year on year. Before I continue, what I'm going to share here right now are my views and my views alone, and therefore are not the same views of my employer, BIS, and also this information is shared under Chatham House rules. Right now, I mean, last year we discussed how we need to take, you know, the cyber and financial crime threats even more seriously, and that landscape, that threat landscape, has really converged, particularly, you know, over the last 18 months, where it's fair to say that most cybercrime is also financial crime. These pose new threats and growing threats to financial stability, integrity, trust in our institutions, but also resilience. And, you know, as new forms of money and other things become more mainstream, this is of particular relevance given actually how these technologies and platforms have been exploited to date. You know, the scale of this challenge is sobering. I mean, sources and estimates do vary, but I think, you know, from 2015 by this year, that estimate that, you know, the global damages will have tripled from almost around 3 trillion to 10.5 trillion. You know, ransomware is on the rise, including actually the value of the payouts, and actually, you know, an increasing number of businesses daily are affected by ransomware. And actually, cryptocurrencies and stablecoin platforms are often exploited by a range of threat actors because of their speed and opacity in laundering funds. That being said, last year, you know, many of you remember that we had a call to action to say, you know, in the same ingenuity that this industry is applying to solving how money moves and how value moves, it can also solve some of the problems that are happening, you know, by consequence almost. You know, how can the industry use the same ingenuity to solve some of the KYC, some of the money laundering and fraud problems, and bake them into these platforms? Because actually, in some of the workshops we run as part of Project Aurora, it's very evident that some of these, some of the blockchain platforms also can provide more transparency and visibility around that. And therefore we can acknowledge some of the meaningful steps that have been taken, over the past year or more, including initiatives where major exchanges and payment providers have come together, in a collaborative way where they can, flag suspected wallets and reach out to other participating platforms and actually show the art of the possible in terms of how you collaborate, and how you share information, and actually how you share and do collaborative analytics. For example, also on the DeFi front, again, there are other tools that enable the tracing of illicit funds across multiple blockchains. So, these solutions are now appearing. But the landscape and threat ahead demands that we widen our lens. We now face a nexus of three really transformative technologies coming together and coming into their own in the not too distant future. These are artificial intelligence, blockchain, quantum computing, and each brings both opportunity and risk. AI is enhancing our detection capabilities, but it's also empowering new fraud techniques, money laundering, deepfakes, and synthetic identity schemes. Blockchain offers unprecedented transparency, but also allows for nearly instantaneous cross-border value flows, complicating enforcement, as we all know. And quantum computing, while still emerging, threatens to undermine our current cryptographic systems unless we prepare in advance. And based on current public information, very few crypto platforms have actually implemented PQC. So we must act now. This convergence is not slowing down, it's accelerating. But if we respond with equal urgency, with technology innovation, and working together with the current system, we can strengthen our trust and for society in the financial system long term. Safeguarding financial trust is not optional, it's our mandate, and we must act. Thank you.
Carole, I'll start with you because you actually have acted on everything that Beju just described. It was right in the nexus of everything. It was convergence of AI and blockchain and cybersecurity, and especially your work on the 2022 executive order, former President Biden's executive order, was historic. Many big moments led to that. There have been historic ransomware attacks, crypto heists. We also experienced at that time the beginning of a war between Russia and Ukraine, and these conflicts are still ongoing today. So I would like to ask you now in 2025, when these attacks and all the events are even amplified, when the world is maybe not safer than it was at that time, which threats do you see nowadays that didn't maybe even cross your mind or you did not have to think about then? And I'd like to ask you that also from the point of view of the development of technology, for example, stablecoins at this time and where blockchain is at the moment.
So fantastic teeing up, and what a great, what great comments by Beju. And I agree that something that really was not discussed very thoroughly, except for a few people that I know inside of the government, were looking at the convergence specifically of these technologies together. And I think AI and blockchain are really interesting ones because they reinforce each other's worst and best traits in really fascinating ways. Like when you think about AI and it has an explainability black box problem, good gosh, for anyone who thought that blockchain was a solution in search of a problem, how about this technology that was made for data transparency and auditability? Doesn't that seem like it's kind of the perfect technology to try to help solve that issue? And the scalability and massive compliance problems that have existed in the cryptocurrency space, can't AI help to address those issues and address like workforce and skills gaps, et cetera? But I also feel that it reinforces some of the most challenging aspects of DeFi. In fact, in Japan a year and a half ago, I was up on stage at the FinTech festival, and I just decided to pull out ChatGPT, and I was like, ChatGPT, if I deployed you on a decentralized network and you started to operate maliciously or erroneously, could I stop you? And its answer was fantastic, by the way. It said, it depends. on how decentralized I am, how good my security is, and how good your authorities are. And I'm like, fantastic answer, ChatGPT. Golly, that was great, very pithy. This is like a horrifying potential scenario. And in fact, we're already seeing where AI-generated money laundering and script-enabled money laundering is in fact happening and being leveraged by these illicit actors. So this is a huge problem. We definitely saw where there were other challenges like related to the authenticity crisis that we currently face, and the absence of investment in things like digital identity have allowed for like both a lot of compromises that exist in AI. Certainly most cybersecurity compromises involve some kind of vulnerability in identity and access management controls and permissions, but then also in cryptocurrency. Like it's being exploited because of insufficient identity and being able to hold accountable bad actors, as well as some other features that exist in the ecosystem. So I think that all of those are some of the greatest threats that I'm the most worried about. On top of that, I'll say something that the government was talking about, but industry is not talking enough about in the last couple of years, remains the poor cybersecurity in this ecosystem. The largest heist in history just happened earlier this year, targeting a crypto exchange. I'm gonna say that again, largest heist in history. That's crazy, and it's never discussed in most cryptocurrency conferences that I go to. Somehow, how is there not a massive surge and influx of investment in better key management and other cybersecurity measures around wallet controls and code audits? How is that not the first top topic? No one likes getting robbed. How is that not? I don't know how to supercharge that, except this panel, very excited to talk about it with some amazing people that have focused on these issues. But that's something, I think the lack of continued focusing and underscoring that issue continues to be a concern of mine.
And thank you. Sungyong, what continues to be your concern, or let's rather say what is becoming your concern from the point of view of law enforcement? Because we heard there's many problems with deepfakes right now, fake IDs, deepfake videos of executives, different ways that malicious actors are working, cyber attacks, crypto heists. Is there something that you're seeing on the law enforcement side that has not been there before that's presenting challenge for you on the technical point of view?
Sure. First of all, I'd want to make a disclaimer first, because I failed to make a disclaimer in my first panel in the morning. So yeah, my speaking here does not really represent the Interpol's opinion for sure. So just to let you know first. So for sure, I mean, to get into the details, I want to let you know that Interpol is the intergovernmental body between the police. So we help member countries to send the requests to receive information that they needed from other countries. So when they send the request, they include the request together with the relevant data and information. For instance, in case of the virtual asset related matters, instead of the IBAN accounts, which used to be mentioned in their request for the traditional fraud matters, nowadays we see increasing number of the virtual asset addresses being mentioned in the request. So we see increasing number of virtual assets involved in the fraud and other cyber of the fraud in most of the times. But the thing is that we only see the fraction of the overall transaction. We don't follow we don't really monitor the on-chain transactions at all. We only see the requests from the member countries, and even those member countries don't really make a request through the Interpol for all the crimes being committed and abusing the virtual assets. So I mean, the thing that I mentioned here does not really reflect the global picture of the virtual asset trends or the uses by the criminals. So based on that, I mean, as you all know, we see, I mean, you know that all like the privacy enhanced technologies like the traditionally used like the TOR and VPN is being used together with the other privacy enhanced like the coins, like the Moneros, as well as the mixers and tumblers. You all know that, and then they are now increasing using the P2Ps and the high-risk virtual asset service providers, as well as nowadays Bitcoin ATMs. They are also starting to use the Bitcoin ATMs to launder the money, and sometimes they are connecting with the hawalas, which is traditionally used for the financial fiat transactions, but now that fiat transaction is being connected with these P2P transactions and other virtual asset transactions, so that it is making our tracing even more difficult. But the thing is that I don't think there is any, I don't think it is impossible to trace it. We can do it, and there are a lot of technologies being developed by our private actors, and they're doing good. But the thing is that whether we have the proper knowledge and expertise to use it, and also whether we have access, because many of the law enforcement agencies, they don't have proper expertise, and they don't really have access to those tools. They may not have any access to the analytic tools like Elliptic, TRM Labs, and Chainalysis, and many other tools, because of the lack of funding. So those are the concerns that we have. There are increasing number of virtual assets of using crimes, but we are not really well prepared. Some countries are well prepared, but many other countries are not well prepared. As long as there are loopholes, the criminals, we're going to abuse those loopholes. So I think those are the concerns that I have.
You mentioned this morning that you still believe that following the crypto money trail is possible, that it is there for you, but there's, things are getting much more complicated at the moment. So Arda, you look at blockchain, you look at actually what's happening right there on the chain. And also you just authored a new Elliptic report that discusses this topic. And you're really, you have brought to us, to our knowledge, how cutting edge crypto crime really is. And I want to ask you as well a similar question here. What are some new observations that you see, for example, working on this report that you haven't seen before, specifically on AI's role in exacerbating crypto crimes?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I've been trying to find a way of trying to describe how crypto and AI both reinforce, the best and worst interests of each other for a while. And I think, Carole, you hit the nail on the head there. So I'll be stealing that phrase. Thank you. Now, there are a number of things to note about crypto crime. In many cases, what looks really sophisticated isn't actually that sophisticated at all. It's just the criminal thinking, how can I just circumvent what law enforcement or compliance is doing to stop me. That's actually the very simple way to look at it. So 10 years ago, right? Just going back 10 years ago, the number of blockchains out there was minimal compared to what we have now, right? Most people were very much keeping to Bitcoin, Ethereum, that kind of thing. Now, today, we've got a massively maturing crypto sector. The number of blockchains has massively increased. The use cases have massively increased. We're looking at new stable coins. We're looking at new assets, real-world asset tokenization, etc. The number of blockchains out there has increased massively. And what that has meant for the criminal is the number of blockchains they can exploit has also increased massively. So this is a great thing for the crypto sector in terms of having these new specialist blockchains that solve certain problems, are able to cater to real-world asset tokenization, etc. But unfortunately, the criminals are very much thinking, how can I exploit this? How can I use this to my advantage? And what we see in increasing cases of is actually, like I said, not particularly sophisticated in essence at all. Right? A criminal basically says, okay, here is this little-known blockchain. Let me just swap my assets to that and cash out in that. No one will notice because no one's able to trace these smaller chains yet. No one's able to look and and investigate these chains. Also, it just takes a lot of time. Imagine if a criminal, you go from Bitcoin to Ethereum to another blockchain, back to Ethereum to Tron to something else, etc., backwards and forwards. For a law enforcement investigator, that means right, I have to investigate that swap, then manually trace that swap, then this one, then that one, then this one, and it takes hours. Right? Now, the good news is this is the kind of thing that we're actively focusing on addressing. Right? We're now able to trace cross-chain activity across 56 different blockchains, last time I checked, at Elliptic, and counting as well, which means that we're able to stop these brand new projects, these very innovative projects that are coming out, being used for this kind of illicit activity, that we can trace any illicit activity that's intentionally using their blockchains to disguise itself. And of course, AI and behavioral detection is a big part of that, right? We're very much innovating in terms of using AI to identify patterns to identify illicit, suspicious activities using the transparency of blockchain. We're quite cautious, of course. We don't want, false positives, for example. We don't want to misidentify, perfect legitimate crypto activity as illicit. So this is, of course, still work in progress, but it's very important for us to be able to leverage this kind of ability, AI-enhanced ability, because the criminals are very much doing it themselves, right? The criminals are, as Sungyong said, really not stranger to this. They're using the deep fakes, they're using AI chatbots to scam many people and initiate romantic chats with many people in one go. So they're very much embracing AI, and we need to do it as well. It's a very, in that sense, it's a very exciting time to be in this kind of sector, massively innovating to ensure that as the crypto ecosystem matures and expands, we're able to cover it from a safety perspective.
Yeah, you've talked about the novel projects, even individuals trying to benefit from this and steal funds, but also right now the scale of crimes is expanding, and sometimes it's even on nation-state level, right? You talked a lot also before about the work of DPRK groups and different areas around the world. And Carole, your work at US Treasury also was very interesting because you always called for digital asset standards, especially in terms of sanctions evasion's role of crypto. So I'd like to ask you that, how do you see the role of AI in crypto in this, basically, when it's threatening national security and the stability of global financial markets? Are there some frameworks that could be set, that could be worldwidely, implemented worldwide at a better rate than they are right now? And yeah, do you think there is a solution for this?
Yeah, I'm super concerned already about where AI is mostly being used by people, by natural persons and a lot of criminals, to be able to fuel more successful sanctions evasion. Am I worried in the future about the fact that we now, because of how sophisticated AI is, smart contracts can actually be smart? Like, we are now at the reality where I think that true decentralization can in fact be achieved. Like true, real, like indefeatable decentralization, to the point that really, really concerns me when I'm thinking about the fact that I don't view that the inability to recover assets or take down a network is necessarily a desirable feature in a financial system. That obviously is different than many people in the cryptocurrency industry do feel that that is a desirable feature. And this is where I think we've not figured out what the right mitigations and controls are, the fundamental trust tech primitives that need to be built into the ecosystems to allow us to be able to engage in this activity, I think, in a democracy and rule of law preserving way. I'm really concerned about the fact that the industrialized like scale pig butchering networks that are currently relying upon cryptocurrency, like ransomware. I've heard many people that I respect a lot have said that ransomware would work better if they used TradFi. I'll tell you, I patently think that is false, and I do not agree at all that if you had to rely on wire transfers and gift cards, that ransomware would be, that you would have the sophisticated ransomware as a service economies that we do now. Now, I do not believe that that is cryptocurrency's fault. It has some interesting features that make it very attractive to licit and illicit users. This is the industry's fault. This is a problem that like not everyone is necessarily like responsible for to same degrees, but we have not built in the different compliance technologies. Programmable money, that's the thing about software. You can program it to do just about anything that you want it to. And instead, we had an instance of a major platform that is used very commonly by certain state actors take a vote on whether or not they were going to stop that state actor's money laundering, and that vote failed. And that is an interesting, first off, demonstration to many of the regulators that knew that these were choices being made by people that chose not to stop that activity from happening. But then also really underscores the fact that, okay, we've got to figure out what does the right balance, because we don't want a complete state surveillance, state of surveillance across these ecosystems. I do think that the public traceability is actually a consumer privacy nightmare, but I'm delighted that these criminals are deciding to publish their transactions publicly. I hope they do that forever. I hope all criminals publish their transactions publicly if they do them, but I am worried about the fact that even privacy-enhancing tech is the future of this space too. So the one risk mitigating feature that we have of this technology is potentially being eroded by people pursuing privacy tech, and for noble purposes. We don't want to publish our transactions publicly for a lot of reasons, but then what are the risk mitigating building blocks that we're building into the systems? They're not happening. We're not even doing cybersecurity standards that need to get put in place, and ultimately that's unfortunately making the sector an unwitting open ATM to Lazarus group, and nobody wants to be that. Nobody wants to be that. I think that there's some real opportunities to work together to try to define what those are and then get implementation across, especially the most responsible actors in the space.
Understood. And Sungyong, earlier in your earlier panel also, you said that you're not that concerned about privacy. There's always ways to kind of figure out who the actor was. But my question for you is, though, is the jurisdictional challenge bigger than the technological right now at this moment in your personal daily work? What's the biggest kind of obstacle that you see when you have, for example, criminal action, a crime scene in one country, and then a cash out point in a different one, and you can actually see this trail? What would help? Would it be another technical solution? Would it be private-public partnerships, or access to information from VASPs, or anything like that? What do you think?
I firmly believe that it is more about the jurisdictional matter rather than the technological matter. Because, private entities, companies, they are pouring a lot of time and effort and developing this kind of the tools using the technologies, which is seemingly abused by the criminals. Criminals are abusing the technologies, but our good people from our side, law enforcement, and then private actors who are supporting the law enforcement agencies are developing those tools using those technologies. I think it is more about jurisdictional problem because the virtual asset transaction in itself is borderless transaction, and which is being made through the virtual asset service provider, which are not really registered in any jurisdictions or registered but not really complying with the regulations. So it is basically borderless transaction which is being made in a second, but our law enforcement agencies is still living in the world of the cross-border cooperation, and it will remain like that because as long as we are living in this sovereign-based international society, and no country will gonna give up their core sovereignty, which is the law enforcement authority. So it will be highly likely to be remaining like that. So we are fighting against the borderless crime using the cross-border cooperation, which makes nonsense, and I think that is the jurisdictional problem, causes jurisdictional problem that we have to overcome. And for instance, to talk about the detecting this kind of virtual asset service, virtual asset abusing crimes. For instance, not just the detection, but it causes many other challenges. But for instance, in regard to the detection, it causes many different types of hurdles. Well, there are many different types of sources that we can rely on to detect the crime. First will be the victim report. Second will be the STRs reported by the regulated bodies, in this case, virtual asset service providers. Or we sometimes detect thanks to the analytic companies which are analyzing those transactions and providing those intel to us. They are those good source of the intelligence, but unlike, for instance, in case of victim reporting, they have lesser option to report the crime compared to the traditional financial transactions. So when victim make a transaction to a foreign country, they know that which is the country that they are sending money. In case of virtual asset, they are sending the virtual asset to some wallet address, but they don't know which is the country that the money is going. They have no idea where the money is going. So in that case, in traditional fiat transaction, they know they sometimes file a police complaint not only to their own jurisdiction where the victim they themselves are living, but also they file the police complaint to the jurisdiction where the money is being directed to, where the beneficiary account is located, so that beneficiary account jurisdiction can open their own domestic investigation, not relying on the mutual legal system requested by the victim jurisdictions, and open a case, use their own power to seize the assets and further develop the case. But in case of virtual asset, it is not possible. So detection by the money laundering jurisdiction is getting lower because victims don't know where to reach out to, even though they're sending the virtual asset to the well-known virtual asset service providers. Sometimes they have no idea where that virtual asset service provider is located, because I have some cases that I supported, and those kind of cases, I'm not going to mention the name of that virtual service providers, but it is well-known one. Well, it was known to be registered in Shah. I reached out to Shah. They said that they are not registered. So after I collecting the intelligence from the private entities, they told me that, oh, they are now the Cayman. I went to the Cayman, they said, oh, they are not registered here. And some others said that they now in Panama. I reached out to Panama, they said that, no, they are not there. They are playing a hide and seek game. Even for the law enforcement like us and Interpol like us, we have no idea where they're registered, and even for those well-known VAS. And for the victims, they have no idea. So they have a lesser chance to file a complaint directly to the mainland jurisdiction. For the virtual asset service providers who sometimes they find those suspicious transactions, they want to file, they want to give that intelligence to the law enforcement agencies, but because they are providing global service without registering in all of those countries that they are providing services, they don't have connection with those countries where they need to file. So sometimes they have, even though they want to file the STR, they don't know how to file the STR, whom to file the STR. So that is also a problem which lowers the detection. Same applies to the virtual asset analytic companies as well. If they have intel, sometimes they have to reach out to us so that we can find the right jurisdiction which have power to open an investigation. So those are the hurdles that we encounter also in regard to this virtual asset detection. And I think I'll stop here. Yeah.
I can imagine that both Carole and Arda are facing these issues quite a lot. I imagine that especially with Arda's work, looking at transactions themselves, a lot of times probably you even know where all this money is going, but then there's really not much that you can actually do or act on. And I'll ask Carole about details about this later, but I would like to address one question to Arda first. You mentioned hide and seek. How does it feel, or how does it, what's your experience playing hide and seek with AI right now? Because I'm guessing when you're looking at things on-chain in the past year, maybe big, especially nation-state actors are taking things into their own hands in a bit different way. So what are some of the observations that you're seeing when AI comes to play?
Actually, what I would say is, on many occasions, it's quite surprising how little hide and seek some of these criminals play in terms of their illicit activities. I mean, we've seen scores of Telegram groups where they openly advertise, AI-enabled solutions like deepfake video solutions, and they literally say, hey, you can buy this tool and then you can use it to scam people by pretending to be romantically whatever. We've seen AI chatbots on sale where they're saying, oh, look, here's a demo of this thing being used to scam 50 people on Facebook at once, or something like that. Sometimes they're very, very, very open, frankly, about what they're doing and what they're using AI for. And of course, the bad news is they are using crypto in many cases to facilitate the purchase and sale of this these kinds of tools, especially for purposes of fraud. And the other bad news, unfortunately, is that when we look at those transactions, because as you say, we can analyze these transactions as part of Elliptic solutions, they seem to be processing a lot of crypto, which means that this is not just a niche part of crime. This is, we're talking like $30 billion minimum of transactions going through these illicit markets on Telegram or wherever it might be, for example, for these kinds of tools and others. Now, however, even though it's bad news that they're using our industry to facilitate this kind of activity, as Carole pointed out, it's also good news, because the use of crypto means we can trace it. And we're very proud as part of Elliptic to have been able to use our ability to trace these criminals' assets to have contributed to some very high-profile takedowns of major illicit services that have in the past been used, and I can name them publicly because they no longer exist. Garantex, of course, being one of them. Huawei One Pay, Huawei One Guarantee, which is one of these groups, have been disrupted quite significantly. Not completely down, but very much disrupted as a result of the pressure of the exposing of their on-chain activity, and that's only possible because of the traceability of crypto. And on that note, I'll just add another thing. which is that we're seeing scores of AI services being used, for illicit purposes, right? For sextortion, for example, we're seeing explicit deepfake tools, being used, to create explicit versions of people's photos and then use that to extort money from them. Again, the bad news is they use crypto as a means of payment for the use of these solutions. But the good news is they use crypto for these services, because that means that if you're a virtual asset business, if one of your clients is bringing in money from these kinds of services and therefore incriminating themselves in supposedly being affiliated with these services, you can see it and you can stop it. And that, I think, is something that we should be focusing more on and leveraging that power as well.
I'd love to hear Carole's comment on that, because you also worked on this very sensitive topic of privacy versus traceability. So how do you, where is the fine line? What would you like to see more, for example, from VASPs, instead of getting sender-receiver information, getting more on-chain data? Or how could this, for example, be solved in a way that people would still be happy with principles of Web3 or decentralization, that
I think
people can stay safe, actually?
Yes, I know. It's a great comment that really underscores part of the ethos behind a lot of the original creation in Web3, and still a lot of how people feel that crypto should be regulated. There are many that feel that it shouldn't be regulated at all the way that we do financial services, because they're just developers and it's just tech and we're just internet service providers. I've heard many miners say, I highlight to them that we do actually regulate the internet just in a different way, and it's not like and internet service providers have things like general licenses from OFAC for sanctions obligations, which I've never seen any crypto company, including at the network layer, write in to ask for that, but that would be neat and interesting. So I think one of the most important things, I think, can be the industry acknowledging where they do fit under existing frameworks, coming in with the understanding of that, but then also when they want to come in and they want to experiment with things like privacy enhancing tech, which I do think is the future of this industry. I don't publish my credit card statement online, not because there's anything illicit in it, but the world doesn't need to know the embarrassing amount of money that I spend on Amazon and DoorDash. So I get why people want privacy enhancing tech in crypto. I think that's the only probable future for this technology. But I tend to see companies diving straight into the privacy needs and enhancements without offering, here's the governance framework and model of tiered permissions and read access and read-write access, or whatever your risk mitigating model would be, because not every coin, not every chain is made alike. But basically to ensure that there is necessary transparency and discoverability for the law enforcement guys, like Interpol sitting on this stage, and for regulators, and for counterparties. In 2019, when we were passing the FATF standards for virtual assets, I remember the industry coming in and saying that the travel rules shouldn't apply to crypto, and it's impossible to know who's on the other side of the internet, which I thought was a wild thing to say, since that is not, in fact, true with the internet. There have been technologies that have allowed for identity and trust across the internet for decades. But then also, the industry essentially, most of the industry reps that day, essentially admitting to the fact that they had no idea if they were violating sanctions, which, by the way, carry strict liability obligations, and which I'm not even saying I like strict liability. I'm saying that Congress established that as the standard, and it doesn't matter if I like it or not. That is the law. So I think that you had asked before about frameworks. I think acknowledging frameworks, which I think can look like financial regulatory obligations at FATF, like the FATF standards. I think it can also look like lessons that we have from internet multi-stakeholder governance and responsibility. Again, providers of the underlying infrastructure that that everything rides upon for our communications and our entire digital society carries expectations, and there is regulation that they are subject to, and that they carry, and that they assert themselves when they're participants in places like ICANN. I think that there's frameworks like that we could be relying upon. I also think that something that would help give people more comfort there would be if we actually built something that would allow for instantaneous machine-readable sharing of IOCs or indicators of compromise, whatever, that are cryptocurrency related. Maybe this is crypto wallets. We've learned this lesson in cyber, that we needed to be able to share in an instant, machine-readable way, point-to-point, machine-to-machine, different cyber signatures, because bad guys were targeting us and we needed to share information at the speed of the internet. No one's done that for cyber money. no one's sharing that kind of information at that kind of speed. Why aren't we using the already existing standards and just adapting them for crypto wallets? I think that there's so many different frameworks that we could put in place, but I'm not seeing the industry come together, and decentralized communities have a hard time organizing, I get it. But if they could organize and develop those standards, there's some groups that have been trying to, like the Blockchain Governance Initiative, but more industry needs to come together and agree and come in and offer what those solutions are. I think that these are solvable problems.
And Arda, Elliptic is solving this partially, or at least trying to, in the future as well, with development of new technologies. Where do you see the focus in the next couple of years? Will this be more in better predictive tools for detecting crimes before they're happening, or maybe within the tools themselves that can de-anonymize data? Or where is the focus of Elliptic, or your personal wish where technology could take us in this case?
I think, drawing on what I was saying just before, I think that there's a very real need to be very frank about what resources we have, what are the priorities in terms of illicit activity that we need to resolve, and how we can use new technologies to get the maximum out of those resources, and also limitations, for example, cross-border, data sharing, and the issues that arise from that, and how we can use new technologies to minimize those issues and maximize what we get out of our resources, because resources are finite, right? As you were saying, blockchain analytics tools aren't free, new technologies aren't free, and we need to make the most of this of these kinds of resources. And I think what that really comes from is looking not necessarily about the crime itself, but the facilitators of that crime. So obviously scams have gone through the roof everywhere. The stats seem to be speaking in the same direction. If, for example, you target a scammer wallet on the blockchain, in the grand scheme of things, and that's great for the victim that has potentially been saved from losing their life savings, and it should be encouraged and it should be done. But in terms of stopping the whole issue of the scam wave, you've not made a dent in it. And in fact, if you go to instead the facilitators and prioritize taking down the facilitators and prioritize, actually identifying what they're doing. So I'm talking about, for example, those multi-billion-dollar online marketplaces that, facilitate this kind of industry. Those, deepfake tools that allow these scams to take place on a massive scale, etc. And you look at, for example, their blockchain footprint, and you look at, for example, how you can use predictive tools to identify what's going on there and potentially take those down, you've stopped several scams at once, right? And you've made a much larger dent in the criminals' arsenal. And I think, when you look at criminals, the way they're using new technologies is massively upscaling, what they're doing. You see that in the case of North Korea, you see that in the case of scams, you see that in the case of ransomware. I think we need to think in the same mindset, right? How can we upscale our response by using new technologies for predictive purposes, which is possible, right? Blockchain data is transparent, that you can build algorithms on it. They might not necessarily be 100% accurate, which of course raises a whole new set of questions about, how we don't inconvenience legitimate users, because that's also very important. But it's possible, and I think we need to start thinking in that mindset as well. We can't continue playing catch-up with the criminal. We definitely need to, try and get ahead by leveraging those technologies as well.
So how is it possible to scale forensic methods and tools, for example, to keep up the pace of what Arda just described?
Well, I know that we are already over time. Should I give in detail? Or
we actually got permission to go a little bit over because it's the last session of the day, and it seems like actually the audience is listening. Right.
So well, for about from what I see, because we speak a lot, many times with those analytic tool companies and technological companies, and as I mentioned, police officers, especially the local police officers who are meeting those victims, saying that I sent money to this wallet. They have no idea what to do. They don't really understand what victim says. And there are some the analytic companies, tool companies, which are providing AI tools to help those law enforcement agencies to come up with the report by just putting the target wallet address, so that they can prepare what they needed to prepare in an easier manner. So I think there are already increasing number of the tools, and also there's another one. I mean, what I heard recently is those kind of like the airdropping service. So airdropping service, it could be utilized also for the seizing the, restraining the virtual asset address. So it has been only used for the civil matters, civil actions in US, UK, and most recently Hong Kong. And I think by airdropping the order issued by the court to the specific address on chain, it will prevent it will notify the users who are trying to make the transaction to them, and notifying that, oh, this is a suspicious transaction. If you make a transaction with that receiving or sending those to this or other address, you are in the risk. So, I mean, there are a lot of like technologies that we can rely on to further effectuate our investigation. But as I mentioned again, it's not about the technology, I think. It's more about the information, the technology, I mean, the availability of the data that technology will be utilized. If there's no data that technology can be used, then technology will be useless. So we need the data, and that data is located in most of the cases in foreign jurisdiction, which means that we have to go through the mutual legal system, which will take forever, which is not effective to fight against the borderless crime. So there have been a lot of effort from our side, from the international society, by providing, at least in the European level, they have European investigator order where the foreign order could be effectuated without going through the MNET, which is good, but it's only in the Europe, but the crime across the border, and then it is not only remaining in Europe, so we need bigger than that. We need something bigger than that. Well, Budapest Convention, especially the second protocol, comes up with some kind of exceptions of the MNET, but it has still limitation. UN Cybercrime Convention, which is recently enacted, well, will be enforced and signed next month in Hanoi. It is only talking about the retention of the data, not about the search of the data without going through the MNET. So we are still lacking the legal basis, but from our side, what we are doing, instead of going through the MNET, and then even under the current context, we are trying to do what we can do. Most of the time, we are trying to connect the jurisdiction, our member countries, directly with the private entities, especially virtual asset service providers, so that they can work together to, and then, when there was the less of the regulation, there has been virtual asset service provider, even without MNET, providing those private informations, thankfully. Yeah. But nowadays, paradox of the regulation is coming up. So nowadays, as they are being more and more regulated, they are not really sharing those information, which is bad for us because we have to go to the MNET. But even then, as long as there are some voluntarily sharing, I mean, those VAS which are willing to voluntarily sharing those off-chain data, I mean, we are trying to help communication between those VAS and member countries, and also we are to find other solutions. We are trying to connect the victim jurisdiction together with the money laundering jurisdiction, FIU, because in case of FIU, if there is a STR filed by the VAS in their jurisdiction, they have all the KYC information and transaction data, and it is their data, and then they can just share those information to the victim jurisdiction without going through the MNET. So we are trying to connect the foreign FIU with the victim jurisdiction so that we don't go through the MNET. So we are trying to find a viable option under the current context, but I think we need to have more systemized solutions to fight against this crimes of using the virtual assets.
Great. Carole, can you imagine one such solution, such one main framework or one main practice that would help actually protect basically individuals and institutions? Or
see, I guess I think that a mix of FATF and UN Cybercrime Convention are at least the rule of law aspects of making sure that information can be discoverable, but they also implicitly demand that information is defended, and democratic principles are inherently built into making sure that the rule of law justly operates. So I think that those frameworks are really important. But I also will tell you that the privacy framework, I've literally never seen anyone take the NIST privacy framework and apply it to crypto, which is a project that I'm thinking about doing because no one has ever, I've never seen anyone do it. Someone may have, but I think that that's a really good one because it highlights that privacy and anonymity are not the same thing. Privacy tends to mean that there is sensitivity sensitive data that is disclosable and discoverable under certain conditions, permissions, and protections. And that's the right debate. Like that stage I've never really seen set in a really thoughtful, deep dive discussion of like what information should be discoverable by whom and under what conditions. I am totally on board with the fact that DeFi means something different, and we shouldn't treat everyone and all node operators the same that we do typical crypto exchanges and VASPs. But do I also feel that if the nature of how financial instruments are now moving shifts, then the regulatory perimeter should shift with the risks. But we need to understand those risks from all sides, including unlawful and undesirable state surveillance and privacy violations. That's a part of the risk profile too. But I've never seen it used.
Thank you for highlighting that. I think we, especially with decentralization and Web3, a lot of times forget that actually anonymity is not privacy. It's something completely different. And Arda, one quick question for you, an advice for Web3 companies here or any kind of financial companies. What would you say is one critical piece of security infrastructure or tool or method that companies should implement today that you see in your practice is completely underutilized?
I mean, I won't say blockchain analytics, obviously, but I think that I think the important thing is, we all know that there are cybersecurity practices out there. We all know that there's operational security practices that we should all be doing, and in many cases are doing. I know that certification in that kind of realm is very, very important and is being increasingly seen as serious. But we really shouldn't cut corners. In an industry where transactions are pretty much completely irreversible, and one copy-paste mistake can lead to potentially several millions, hundreds of millions of dollars lost, we really, really shouldn't be cutting corners. Unfortunately, that's how the DPRK takes its prey. Unfortunately, that's what they rely on. I do think that's an important thing that we do need to know. And inherently, it's not necessarily even a specific framework or a cybersecurity practice. I would emphasize it's actually more psychological, which is that we really shouldn't be thinking about this in the framework of, oh, it will never happen to me, right? That's, I'm sure, many scam victims, many hack victims have gone down the path of thinking that to their peril. And absolutely. I think in that sense, we should make sure that we do not approach it from that.
Absolutely, I think statistics are also proving that all the phishing attacks, all the sextortion things, all the deep fake videos right now, phishing, social engineering. Just before we conclude, a small personal advice from Sungyong, if that is okay. How can, for example, we individuals who maybe think that we cannot be scammed protect ourselves from, and make sure that we never end up as a case study or a statistic crossing your desk? You see a lot of these very simple things that all of us think we cannot become victims of. Do you have advice for us?
Well, I don't know. As an individual, because what I do is more about between the nation states. So that's my job. So, but from the individual side, frankly speaking, there's so many victims that from my side, I mean, for sure, we should not impose any stigma on the victim side, for sure. It shouldn't happen because it will decrease the victim reporting. But sometimes victims are negligent from their side as well. So I think, victims should also provide, exercise the higher due diligence on those transactions they are making to prevent. It's our shared responsibility. It's not only the victim's responsibility. It is also social responsibility. Our responsibility is enforcement and prevention and providing the relevant modus operandi, so that those modus operandi could be known to the victim, so that victim could not be. It's
basically the decentralized Web3 principle of do your own research, right? In a way.
Yeah. So yeah, so I think they should provide more of the higher due diligence, the victims from our side. So as a law enforcement side, we will definitely provide all the relevant information to the public, as already we are doing with the financial fraud in the fiat, using the fiat money, but also in regard to the virtual asset as well. We are doing it, and many countries are doing it, but still the word is not really being spread and dispersed into the society and each of the individuals. So I think it's more about training and education is more needed so that they won't be deceived by the new technologies, by the new models operandi. So I think it's more of, I would say, higher due diligence.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this very interesting conversation, very thoughtful, and also thank you all for listening and being part of it. I hope that next year we have even more conversations like this on Web3 conferences around the world. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a great session on crypto cyber risk for national security, finance, and Web3. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to a commemorative photo session, everyone. Just squeeze into the middle side, please. Then we can all fit into the camera. Thank you very much. Please give them a big round of applause. Thank you very much.